Let us now move into the kinds of beetles you might see that are feeding on the leaves of trees and shrubs. Most often, what we're going to see are beetles that are in the family Chrysomelidae, which are the leaf beetles. And as the name may indicate, most all of them feed on leaves. And the representative of the leaf beetle family that is probably most widespread in North America would be the elm leaf beetle, which is associated with the leaves of many kinds of elms, particularly like Siberian elm and English elm, but also will feed on American elm and slippery elm as well. The insect in the winter survives in an adult form, and it is hiding normally somewhere outdoors. And in its dormant condition during the winter, it also has a color change, so it turns kind of a cocky green color. And this is indicating that it's in diapause, that it's not reproducing, and it's shut down its metabolism to a great degree so it can conserve its energy. Normally, this winter form is spent outdoors, but this is one of the handful of insects we have that are common in yards and gardens that may also have the habit of entering buildings to winter. It can be a nuisance invader, an insect that moves indoors sometimes and thus becomes an issue because it's a bug indoors. As a insect in a home, they are harmless. They aren't going to feed on anything. They're not going to reproduce. They can only develop on the leaves of elm trees, but they can be quite abundant sometimes in buildings and thus cause concern and sometimes alarm. Now, come spring, the adults resume activity. They emerge from wherever they have spent the winter, and they revert back to their normal form in terms of color, which is a lighter color. And the adults will move to the leaves of the elm trees, which are usually fairly young at this time. We're talking probably June, maybe late May. And the adults will chew holes in the interior of the leaf. Maybe you could call it a shot hole. They're irregular holes in the center. They're bigger than a little hole that might be made by a flea beetle or a sawfly larva. And they will then intersperse this with mating, and the females then with egg laying. Now, the eggs of elm leaf beetles will be laid on the leaves, and they'll be laid in the form of a mass. The eggs are yellow. They're kind of jug-shaped. They've got a little nipple on them, and they're only going to be laid on elm leaves. This is one of the egg masses that perhaps you could mistake for lady beetle eggs. And the picture on the lower right, I'm showing lady beetle eggs that had also been laid on an elm leaf. I think you can see the differences. The elm leaf beetle eggs are going to be, again, kind of a little jug shape with a little nipple on them, and the lady beetle eggs are going to be more spindle shaped. They're going to be more orange instead of a paler yellow. And again, lady beetle eggs you can find anywhere, but elm leaf beetle eggs will only be laid on the leaf of an elm tree. The eggs hatch. The very first stage larvae then disperse. Originally they're going to feed near the egg mass, and you'll see little holes that have been chewed, little pits. As they molt, get bigger, and feed more extensively, they're going to produce skeletonizing. So we're seeing skeletonizing once again. One of the few insect groups that are typically a skeletonizer of leaves are larvae of leaf beetles. Many larvae of leaf beetles produce skeletonizing injuries, as do the slug sawflies. And next we'll talk about Japanese beetle. So here we see younger larvae, and as they get older they tend to get darker, and of course they feed more extensively. And you can have extensive skeletonizing, extensive defoliation. So leaves may look very lacy. In outbreaks, you might have pretty much the whole tree affected in a manner like this. And this happens early. Usually the first cycle of feeding is occurring in high level late in June, maybe early in July, producing a defoliation of the plant. They then crawl down the trunk. So here we see some larvae that are crawling down the trunk. And that's to look for a place to pupate. Sometimes they find a nice little crack or crevice on the bark and they'll stay there, but often it's near the base of the plant. And here we see some elm leaf beetle prepupae and pupae at the base of the plant in the picture on the upper left. A prepupa is a full-grown larva that is shrinking up a little bit, in this case curls, and is just about to shed its skin to molt to the formal pupal form. It's just kind of a transition. It's the last period on the of the late stage larvae, the last stage larva. Anyway, you'll see both of these mixed at the base of the plant. The pupae indicated here, and of course during that pupal stage all the changes take place that allow it to convert from the larva via the pupa to the ultimate adult form. So here's several elm leaf beetle pupae. And the cycle's repeated. The adults emerge from those pupae, they fly to the top of the trees, they lay the eggs. You'll have another cycle of defoliation. Usually this is occurring in August. And then they will move down to the base of the trunk, pupate, become adults, and then seek some sort of winter shelter, which could be your house. There are other leaf beetles that are less commonly encountered. Cottonwood leaf beetle is one that is a good-looking insect. It's brightly colored. It is often got some red, but it can be brown as well. There's some variation in this. So winter is spent in the adult stage, as with the elm leaf beetle. The adults are out, emerging out and about early in spring. After the leaves have come out, they mate, and then they're going to be starting to lay eggs in late spring, similar to the elm leaf beetle. The eggs are laid in a mass, and this is one that could be similar and perhaps confused with a lady beetle egg mass. It's pretty similar in form, a little lighter in color, only going to be found on some kind of populus, some kind of cottonwood or poplar, but it does kind of look like a lady beetle egg mass. The larvae are going to hatch from that after a week or so as they develop and ultimately hatch from those eggs, and usually cluster around for a couple of days after they've hatched and then start feeding. And originally they're going to feed in a group, and they're going to produce a skeletonizing kind of injury. And as they get older, though, they're going to change in habit. They're going to be able to feed more extensively, and you're going to see them become progressively more a generalist type of defoliator. So you're going to get a much more ragged kind of injury with the late stage larvae. So early stages, another skeletonizer. Later stages, a generalist feeder. Typically, 2 generations are produced annually. They will pupate on the tree. The pupae, as indicated in the picture in the lower right here, kind of unusual, kind of remind me of a little resting bat or something, but the adults will emerge from that pupa. There is a closely related species you find on willow that's also native. The cottonwood leaf beetle is native. This beetle here, Chrysomela knobs leaf beetle, is also a native. Elm leaf beetle is native to Europe. This insect here is pretty variable in color. You see quite a bit of difference in patterning and also in color. So you might not recognize different forms of this as being the same insect. Also, the one on the upper left kind of looks like a lady beetle, but it's not. It's a leaf beetle. And then there's one flea beetle that is of particular concern in terms of feeding on some of our ornamental plants, not just trees, not just shrubs, but also some of our herbaceous plants as well. Apple flea beetle. Now, this is an unusual flea beetle. We discussed this a little bit in the second section of this class early on, because flea beetles are usually an issue on vegetable crops, and most flea beetles have larvae that develop on the roots of the plants. But, as I indicated, there is an exception, and that's the apple flea beetle. It's a notable local exception. So, the apple flea beetle is associated in the larval stages with evening primrose. So, in this sequence of pictures here, we see the adult in the upper left. It's a shiny beetle, and like other flea beetles, they jump when disturbed. So that's how you know it's a flea beetle, or let's talk next about a flea weevil. They're going to lay eggs just on evening primrose, and there's eggs indicated in the lower left that have been laid on evening primrose by this insect. And then the larvae feed on that plant. So those are leaf beetle larvae, the larval stage of the apple flea beetle, in the pictures on the right, and they can do a fair amount of damage to the evening primrose, although oftentimes they're feeding on evening primrose that's out in wild areas, in eastern plains, for instance, where this is a very common plant. They pupate in the soil, the adults emerge, and they're strong flyers, and they may disperse to long distances, where they will then move into a wide variety of plants to feed in the adult form. They'll produce shot holes, but regular shot holes, large shot holes. This is a large leaf beetle, a flea beetle. So we might see them damaging crabapple or evening primrose, of course, which are always associated, but many other plants as well. Zostinaria, epilobium, grape, Virginia creeper, coyote willow. Lots of plants may be fed on by the apple flea beetle. Apple flea beetle, again, can jump, shiny, usually a shiny green. Now, one last insect that's an oddball insect that emerged during the early 2000s or mid 2000s as a pest is a introduced species known as the European elm flea weevil. Not flea beetle, but flea weevil. Now, the weevils are a family of insects known as snout beetles, and it is rare to find a weevil feeding on leaves, and it's even rarer to find one that jumps. These are weevils that jump. That's why they're called a flea weevil. It's a snout beetle, a weevil. It jumps, and furthermore, it's going to make two kinds of injuries. It's going to make little holes in the leaves when it chews the plant in the adult form, but it's going to make what's called a leaf mine in the larval stage, and we'll talk more about leaf miners next week. So you're going to see a combination of two kinds of injuries produced by this insect: leaf mining and shot hole wounds. So the shot hole wounds first appear very early in the season. The adults have spent the winter somewhere in the vicinity of an elm tree, and they will move to those trees just as the leaves are coming out, and they'll chew little holes in the emerging leaves, and as those leaves continue to expand, you'll see the hole gradually get bigger as well. So very early on, you're going to see shot holes, and that tells you the European elm flea weevil is out and about. They're mating at this time, they're doing some feeding, and then after the leaves have extended, then you'll see them start to lay eggs. The female will lay eggs. They will chew a little pit and insert their eggs into the vein of the plant, and then the larva will hatch from that. And what we see here is a leaf mine produced by the larva. So this needs a little explanation. A leaf mine is produced by an insect that feeds between the surface of the plant. And that's what the larvae of this insect do. They feed between the upper and lower surface. In the beginning, they will make a little serpentine mine, so a meandering mine, and it will gradually get bigger as the larva gets bigger. It then terminates along the leaf edge, and then it becomes more irregular, and it's what we call a blotch leaf mine. So it'll be a blotch leaf mine at the tip of the leaf. Is going to be produced by this insect, and it's going to originate from somewhere in the interior of the leaf. So it'll be a little tail, a little serpentine trail, terminating in a blotch. And were you to open up that blotch leaf mine at the appropriate time, sometime in June, you might see the little flea weevil larva within that leaf mine. It pupates within that and then transforms to the adult form, cuts its way out, and then the adults will be on the plant in early summer, say 4th of July, chewing the leaves, once again producing lots of shot holes. And that's usually the symptom of this insect that is most often visible to people. You'll see just sometimes plants that look like they've just been blasted with buckshot. So lots and lots of chewing wounds in this second cycle of feeding, which is occurring sometime in usually July and may extend well into August. Now, this is an interesting insect because it is an introduced species, but it's also one that demonstrates an ability to rapidly colonize a large area of the country in a very short period of time. This insect was unknown from the western United States until 2006, and very shortly after it was recognized, one could find it essentially on elm throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Uh, Within a year after it was first found in Colorado, it could be found in every county in Colorado. So it has an ability to disperse very well, and it rapidly became the dominant defoliator of elm. Elm leaf beetle, at one time, had been the dominant defoliator, but its numbers uh, declined for reasons that are unclear about 15, 20 years ago. This thing came in and just was ripping up the plants for several years after it started to appear, causing leaves to be, year after year, look like they'd been blasted with buckshot. However, it does look like things are changing with this insect as well. Our natural enemies finally catching up? I would say yes. That's what's happening. Over the last several years, this insect seems to have plateaued and then started to go into decline. And there are natural enemies, in particular a little tiny wasp that is attacking the larvae within the leaf mines. So this could be an insect that is one that had a heyday at a period shortly after it appeared on the scene that was pretty spectacular for many years. Yet, ultimately, natural enemies did finally catch up with it, and the situation largely has resolved itself. Maybe a little too early to say that, but that's the way it's looking at this point in time, here in the year 2016. So that summarizes some of the more common leaf feeding beetles, but there's two more that I want to talk about in the next little section.